Welcome to Previously on X-Men.
The podcast that looks back on X-Men comics, movies, shows, characters, and more. You can find more about this show and others like it at our network's website, radiomeanwhile.com. Other shows on the network include Three Nice Things, where we force ourselves to say three nice things about a movie with a bad and often earned reputation. Radio 64, Video Game Music Remix Radio. 9021, Here We Go, a 90210 rewatch podcast. And you can also find video series over on Radio Meanwhile, such as Comic Book Coffee Break. Share your thoughts on this and upcoming episodes by following us on Facebook and Twitter at Previously on X. Please rate, subscribe, and share the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. I'm Eric Mickles, known online as Dust vs. Tweak, and with me is my co-host,
Hilary Gunning.
And wind! Spread the sound of this podcast so your listeners may hear the show!
So we're doing Storm today.
Today we're spotlighting Storm.
That out.
You know, that tends to be my go-to Storm impression, but it's really only the 90s animated series.
It is exclusively the 90s.
Halle Berry never did that.
Yeah.
I think, like, Storm will say things in the comic, but it never comes across as that. Anyway.
Yeah, and listen, I'm going to want to talk about that, about, like, how the animated series impacted my view of Storm. So we'll want to get into that once we kind of dive in.
Today we're spotlighting Storm. Storm first appeared in Giant-Sized X-Men #1 in May 1975, created by Len Wein and Dave Cockrum.
And that's the one where it's all the new, I mean, it's not the New Mutants, but it's all the new.
It's the all new, all different X-Men.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did this like our second episode. You can go back and listen to Hilary and I reread and talk about Giant-Sized X-Men #1.
And how Xavier's like, hey, I accidentally got a bunch of kids killed, so how would you like to join the team?
Round 3! Let's see, what can we say about this? In creating Storm, Cockrum, the artist, combined two character ideas he already had. And we had talked about this with Giant-Sized X-Men, I think, because Nightcrawler had originally been planned for Cockrum to use in Legion of Superheroes over on DC. So I guess Cockrum was just always drawing and coming up with these superhero ideas and using them in different places. Storm came from two characters. One was called the Black Cat, which, by adding a cape, is where Storm gets her costume from. Cockrum would later create the character Black Cat with Marv Wolfman for Spider-Woman and Spider-Man.
Yeah.
The other character was called Typhoon, who controlled the weather. So he combined the two characters. He gave her the long white hair, despite others at Marvel thinking readers would assume she was a grandmother.
See, that's an interesting thing to think, because the entire character design is very youthful.
Yeah.
You know? Like, you have if you'll remember the original character design for Rogue, say,
yes.
Yeah,
she's like a 55-year-old woman.
Yeah, she's got, colorful hair, but she looks like a million years old.
Yeah. I guess
so
Cockrum
I don't know
had
if the hair is really the thing.
Yeah, I think Cockrum had to convince them that he could continue, consistently draw a youthful-looking character. And I remember, I think it was in that DK Ultimate X-Men Encyclopedia I had, where he said something like, no one's gonna think she's anyone's grandmother. Yeah. When he's done drawing her or stuff.
And in fact, no one does.
Yeah, no, it's funny because when you look, same thing with, the original 5 X-Men, Cyclops has never looked anything younger than 34.
Yeah, that is
in the comics. So
34, I think, is generous.
Right, so I think Storm has always... The Dave Cockrum's X-Men, Colossus and Storm and Nightcrawler, have always kind of looked more youthful than when those, 15-year-olds started the X-Men. I actually don't know how old Storm's supposed to be. I guess we could talk about it when we get to her joining the X-Men.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll say, I'm making fun of the, old woman thing, because the hair has nothing to do with it. Yeah. But I will say that all of them at least seem much older than the original team was supposed to be.
Yeah, yes.
Which I think is true. Aren't they supposed to be kind of older?
Yeah, I think they're all supposed to be a little bit older. I just don't know. I can't remember how much older.
Adults, at least, right?
Yeah, I mean, Wolverine's a, straight up adult.
Yeah.
And Banshee was, is old too. Yeah, I've never really pinpointed, Nightcrawler and Storm's age. Colossus, I think, is, 18 or 20.
Yeah.
When he joined. So I guess Storm might be in that range. Storm is the third female character to join the X-Men and their first black character.
Mm-hmm.
Pre-X-Men history. The history of Storm before she became Storm. She was born Aurora Monroe.
As you may know.
As you may know. She was born to a Kenyan princess who comes from a line of African witch priestesses and a American photojournalist. Storm,
I did not know that.
Storm being from a long line of like witches and priestesses is one of those. It's like we talked about with Rogue Spotlight. It just overcomplicates a very simple idea.
Yeah.
You don't need to add all this. So I think some stories kind of hint that Storm has some maybe her weather powers are magic in some ways. I know in the Ileana miniseries, the magic miniseries in the 80s, Storm is like a straight up sorceress.
Yeah, I've never read any of those. I've never had any inkling that she was anything but a mutant.
Do not do like a Scarlet Witch situation with Storm. Future
well,
writers.
I know some of our listeners are very interested in the magic elements, so maybe somebody somewhere loves that, but I've never really, particularly for Storm, I've never really gone there.
Yeah. While Storm is just a baby, she was born in America, New York. When she's just a baby, they moved to Cairo. During the Suez Crisis, a fighter jet crashed into the house and her parents were killed. And that is when Aurora was trapped under the rubble and develops her intense claustrophobia.
Yes, which is very apparent in many of her appearances.
Orphaned, she joins Ahmed El Gibar's children. I call it the Children's Thieves Clubs. I think they're just a bunch of random street thieves.
Kids trained to be thieves.
During this time, she meets...
So hang on. I gotta get this straight. Is this the same storyline? She's born to the Kenyan princess in New York and then goes to Cairo?
Yeah, her parents meet in Africa, move to New York. Storm is born, then they move to Cairo.
Okay, just wanted to nail that down.
But then they're killed in that plane crash. So yeah, she joins Ahmed El Gibar's Children's Thieves, which was kind of expanded in the comic book Aurora Before the Storm.
Yep.
Did you read that?
I did, yes. I've read that twice. I read it several years ago and then more recently.
Okay. Mark Sumarik wrote it. That was like one of those Marvel Digest kind of things that like Runaways and... Mary Jane Loves Spider-Man, like those.
Yeah, when was that? Like the early 2000s or something that they were pushing?
I think like 2005.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The mid 2000s, and I think you have a bunch of those like in your house, don't you?
Yeah, I do. They were a lot more accessible for whatever reason. I don't know if it was like when Borders was big and they were just all in the manga section.
Yeah, they were going for the bookstore crowd in a big... Yeah, and they were kind of chasing the growing manga craze with the art style in those, I remember as well.
Yeah, and even just the shape of the book. Mm-hmm. It was like sized like a manga.
Yep. So yeah, that story kind of just... It doesn't really like tell anything important. It's just kind of like a story about a very young Storm being a child thief in Cairo. Though I guess it's also the origin of her opal. Like
the jacket.
Yeah, we finally got Storm's opal. It looks good on her. She wears it well, or whatever Pa Kent says to Wolverine in Origins. During this time, she meets Charles Xavier. Well, meets
I've heard of him.
Yeah, yes. Meets is a strong word. She pickpockets Charles Xavier, and he stops her with his powers. But before he can really recruit her or reprimand her or whatever he's gonna say, he's distracted by his first meeting with the Shadow King.
Ah, yes, the Shadow King.
So when she is older, guess what? Her history gets retconned.
Really?
So in the 80s, in Marvel Team Up 100, there's a flashback where she meets a young T'Challa, saving him from a gang of racists. Because she's Storm, basically, at that point. Or kind of
Storm.
Well, no, I'm wrong. But I think she has her powers in it. I read it recently, too. Anyway, she's the one who saves a young T'Challa / Black Panther from a gang of racists and that. That was retconned by Eric Jerome Dickey's Storm miniseries in 2006. In that one, T'Challa saves her from a gang of racists.
Oh, well, isn't that just delightful?
In Marvel Team Up, written in the 80s, the two travel for a bit, and then they part ways. In the 2006 story, when they meet, the two fall in love, but then part ways. But, they're really, really in love this time. This story is the retcon to explain why they would get married soon after, because it was their interactions in Team Up 100. They show that they kind of have they have a connection, but not like this deep romantic connection. Eric Jerome Dickey's story changes that. Later, she's being worshipped as a weather goddess.
So that's a later development, that the weather goddess thing is put in later?
Well, the weather goddess thing is where we meet her in Giant Size X-Men #1. So, like, there's a gap between when Storm first meets T'Challa and when she joins the X-Men. But I think it's just kind of supposed to be her wandering around the Serengeti. She finds that village, starts getting worshipped as a goddess because she can make it rain for them.
So that is an original to her creation element.
Yes. Yep.
But not something that happens until later in her life.
Right.
Storyline-wise.
Yeah. I think there's later stories in the 90s, and then Greg Pak's Storm series where she kind of talks about how she wasn't in the right headspace at this time, and that's why she's being worshipped, and also, like, the village knows she's not a goddess, and they're desperate for rain, so they're willing to appease this kind of a little off the wall Storm at the moment.
Yeah, I really like that addition that he puts in, because it takes away from that idea of like this kind of backward tribe.
Yeah, that
just like deciding that like she's got powers, so she's magical. Yeah. I like that addition that makes them a little more savvy.
Also, later stories would show that during this time, she learns a little bit more about her powers. She's taught about them because she learns that her powers are connected to the rest of the world and the weather patterns really intricately, and that if she makes it rain for long periods of time in one place, that might be causing droughts in local areas. Because she's taking the water from the atmosphere and everything. And so, like, it kind of explains that she can't just, like, create out of nothing weather. She's just channeling and refocusing the weather patterns.
Well, I mean, that makes sense even if you just think about how her powers have been presented earlier. I mean, like, even if she is just making weather out of nowhere, that's just inherently going to impact weather elsewhere.
So she has to be careful not to be causing droughts or floods or heat waves and all that. Yes, but this is the time where Aurora is found again by Charles Xavier to form his all-new, all-different X-Men. And enter Giant Size X-Men #1 and Krakoa, the island that walks like a man!
Krakoa!
Probably your second favorite element of the X-Men comics.
Oh, absolutely.
Krakoa?
Yep. It's first Sinister, then Krakoa.
Yeah. And if I remember, like, they beat Krakoa because Storm is so incredibly powerful just out of the gate.
Yeah, and actually, when I was reading the Greg Pak run, there was something in there about how she was manipulating the magnetic something or other about the Earth that reminded me directly of what happened with Krakoa, because that's what she does, something in the Greg Pak thing that has something to do with removing a section of the atmosphere or something. I don't know. Right. It just reminded me, because she did something like that was like, what? But it felt like maybe it made sense.
It was the combination of her and Polaris and a few of the, I think, Havoc at the time, like, to take them out. But, like, it's kind of shown out of those, like, all new, all different X-Men. So Thunderbird is killed, Sunfire leaves, and that means it's basically Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, 3 guys whose main powers are being up close, very punchy powers. And you have Cyclops there, but, like, Storm in that team is the most powerful character until Jean becomes Phoenix. So right out of the gate, she's, like, their powerhouse, which is always stuck with me, I think. I think from very early on when I got into X-Men, like, just realizing how powerful Storm was and how strong just being able to control the weather is really struck a chord with me. I'm like, wow.
Well, there's something about just the idea of controlling the weather that feels a little like, I don't know, like, it makes you think of, like, elemental powers in some other genres and that kind of thing. And it sort of feels kind of quaint.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really like lean into it, you
Yeah.
see the potential for how much power she ultimately has.
Yeah. So there's a few things from early Storm stories set after Giant Size. She tends to be surprised by modern American customs. She's in the earlier issues, she's wondering why clothing is mandatory. She's also played pretty maternal at first, becoming kind of a sister to Colossus and Nightcrawler. In some ways to Wolverine, but he's so much older than everybody else at that point. He's like your dad going back to college the same year you start your freshman year.
Yes.
And he's just like, hey, what's up? It's like, no, Dad. Her room is up in the mansion's attic, where she has, which she's turned into a garden. And she keeps, watered with her powers and everything.
Early on, they lean heavy into a similar thing that happens with Colossus. Colossus, they like to play into his naivete.
Mm-hmm.
And with her, I think they, bordering on a little bit of racism, they lean a lot into her as I mean, not the maternal, but sort of like the Mother Earth kind of thing, and a little bit of, like with her being surprised by American culture, just sort of that idea of her as like coming from Africa and what does she know and all that kind of stuff. So they while they're trying to get at like all these different cultures with this new group of X-Men, which they're kind of like getting away from the homogeneity of the original group.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they tend to land a little heavy on stereotypes.
Yeah, she was 6 years old when her parents were killed in Cairo,
Right.
modern day Cairo. It's only when she's like a weather goddess do we ever really see her just being like straight up nude. So, and we already know that later stories are kind of saying like, well, she wasn't all with it at that moment. So it's not like the idea of clothing should be new to her.
Right.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where you read early stories like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes that garden that she has represents her innocence/innocence lost.
Mm-hmm.
Which is whenever that garden is dead, she's like, why did I let it die? What's happened to me? In a story where Magneto and Mesmero capture the X-Men, and Magneto keeps them in an underground volcano lair.
Like you do.
Yeah, like you do. Storm uses her lockpicking abilities to break herself and the X-Men free.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very cool. It's one of those things where she has to like just use the bobby pins in her teeth kind of situation.
Yeah, I like any time that really any of the X-Men, you get to see them use skills that have nothing to do with their powers.
Yeah. Stranded in the Savage Land, Storm is the mutant that Sauron absorbs in order to turn back into Sauron. Karl Lycos absorbs her powers to turn into Sauron at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Before the Dark Phoenix saga really starts kicking off, Storm has to save Kitty Pryde from the White Queen. This is before Kitty Pryde joins the X-Men, early in their recruiting of her to come to the school. She has to save her from the White Queen, and this is kind of the beginning of the mother-daughter relationship between Storm and Kitty.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of mother-daughter, kind of just like big sister, younger sister kind of thing. It's never like you're my mom kind of situation, but she's much more maternal.
It's a very familial kind of relationship.
Yeah, she's very protective at Kitty, and Kitty kind of looks up to her. At one point, Dr. Doom captures the X-Men and works with Arcade to capture them. And he's in love with Storm. He's falling in love with Storm. But he encases her in chrome and like living chrome. And
living chrome.
And in this situation, she basically loses her dang mind. Being encased in that chrome, and she almost wrecks him and the X-Men at the same time. She has to be talked down by Colossus. She's kind of given the title Rogue Storm in this situation, where she's like really connected to Mother Earth. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Doom's like, oh no! But yeah, he's got a thing for Storm now. At that point, though, technically that story isn't Dr. Doom, because John Byrne had left the X-Men to go work on Fantastic Four. And he didn't give Chris Claremont the okay on that story. And there's a scene where Arcade lights a match on Dr. Doom's armor, and Dr. Doom does nothing about that. And John Byrne's like, Arcade should be dead. So they wrote it out that Dr. Doom that's dealing with the X-Men is a Doom bot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Whenever you don't like a Dr. Doom in a Dr. Doom story, he's just a Doom bot. He's always a Doombot. So the White Queen is getting back at Storm for their first issue. So the White Queen switches bodies with Storm, and in the process tries to steal Kitty Pryde back to the Hellfire Club for their Massachusetts Academy. Mm-hmm. So Storm is now in Emma Frost's body with her psychic powers. They have a big midair fight. It looks like their bodies have been switched. They're falling, and we find out that Storm's back in her body because she swoops down and saves the falling Emma, which Emma would not have done. Though, in that moment, Emma tries to kill Storm with a knife, and Storm has to be stopped by Wolverine from killing the White Queen in that situation.
Boy, I was completely unaware that there was any connection between Storm and Emma.
You know, I don't know how much has been played since. I remember it kind of being a Chris Claremont thing. I have a hard time thinking of really, like, any interactions the two have later on. Mm-hmm. So...
Yeah, my reading is really... There's a giant hole because I've started at the beginning, mm-hmm. and then I've read recent stuff. So anything in the middle is just a complete black hole to me.
Well, I mean, when Emma... goes to the light side. She's working with Generation X for so long, and then she joins Grant Morrison's New Mutants, and at that time Storm's not there. And then when that era ends, Storm is now off in Wakanda. So I just don't think they've had too much. I think recently in the post House of X, Powers of X, there's been some stuff. But yeah, early on, I think they were kind of being positioned as like nemeses. Mm-hmm. What else happens right after that? Dracula in issue 159.
Sure.
I don't know how most people think of this issue. I kind of like it. Dracula fights the X-Men. He is turning Storm into a Dracula. He's turning Storm into a vampire and wants her to be his consort / queen kind of situation. The X-Men have to fight him. He leaves. She's fine, but... It's one issue. I enjoy it. Let's see. That was Doctor Doom, and then that was Dracula. So this is where we go to the present day Marvel Team Up 100, because it's actually like a frame story. Storm and T'Challa, who is now Black Panther, they meet up, and they're like, "What, Storm?" He's like, "Oh, T'Challa, let's do this adventure where we can share right now." And they have an adventure, and then we get to see their flashbacks of them like traveling together. And so at the end of that issue, Black Panther's like, working together and seeing you now, I can't help but think. And Storm's like, what could have been? He's like, that's right. And then they just kind of leave. And the little box that Claremont has on the side is like, and they know that they can never really be together. Okay, so here we just watched this story get adapted into the X-Men animated series in season 1. The Morlocks kidnap Angel so that their leader, Callisto, can marry him because he's so dang beautiful. Which we see
a version of in...
Yes, it's Cyclops in the cartoon.
Yeah.
Because she wants an heir from Cyclops. I don't remember if it's an heir she's like necessarily claiming, but she's going to marry Angel. And she actually starts like clipping his the feathers that allow him to fly. Mm-hmm. And the X-Men are like, holy crap! So
they'll grow back.
To save Angel and the X-Men, Storm challenges Callisto to a knife fight. So before this knife fight starts, Storm has been attacked by plague and is feeling very sick. Mask has been messing with her face, and she's dealing with her claustrophobia because she's underground in the subways, where subways are like driving through, and so she's dealing with all of that when she starts this knife fight. And she lands the killing blow on Callisto. Callisto's only saved because the Morlocks have a healer. And I think it's one of those situations. It's like, how did you know they have a healer? And she's like, I didn't.
I'm brutal.
Yeah. So she gets to save Angel. And as a side award, she's now their guilt-ridden leader.
Yay!
Yay!
And she puts a lot of heart and real action into that role.
There's more regret in her leadership of the Morlocks than there is actual leadership.
She just drops them and leaves.
It's such a bizarre thing, because like when the Morlocks are like, we are never coming there, it's like, okay, that explains why they don't want to live in the mansion, but it doesn't explain why the X-Men aren't bringing them food and clothing.
They can just live their own lives.
Yeah, why aren't they just constantly bringing and supplying them with stuff? No,
it's the same city.
It's crazy. That's one of those things where people are like, yeah, she's the leader, but we don't want to write those stories.
Yep.
But
Is
yeah,
it the same? Like in the cartoon, she's just like immediately like, okay, I'm not doing this, so rule in my stead, I guess.
Yeah,
Is it
Callisto
that
is
abrupt in the comics?
Yeah, Storm is basically, Callisto will be in charge when I'm not here,
All
which
right.
goes over great. Paul Smith, who's the artist on it, absolutely kills that panel though with Storm and Callisto fighting. It's one of those things where you see them fighting, you don't see the knife blow, but you like slowly panel by panel see Storm walking towards the camera and Callisto falling to the ground.
Cool.
It's a very cool panel. All right, so during Wolverine's failed wedding to Mariko, Storm is feeling on edge because of her fight with Callisto. Life, kind of changing and getting darker in life. Storm is feeling on edge here. She meets Yukio, who we saw in the Wolverine movie. She's different in the comics, but she's still kind of like a free spirit character. Storm is just like knocked sideways by how free and how daring Yukio lives her life, and it really kind of like awakens this change in Storm, and she goes over she undergoes a makeover, which is how we get her 80s punk and mohawk look.
Yeah, this is when I really start to dig the Storm character. When I was younger, I would see these images and think that's not Storm because I really only knew her from the cartoon. But as an adult, I really like this transformation for her.
Yeah, I think when I read it, it was just kind of like, oh, cool, there's a new look. I don't even know if I knew it was coming. I don't know. I don't remember if it was in that encyclopedia I had. I thought it was kind of cool. But like you, because it wasn't the animated series look, I felt a little weird about it, but I kind of got over it. I think when I played X-Men Legends, I tend to go for the mohawk look.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's just this physical manifestation of what is really changing in her character from being that more maternal, kind of stagnant, whatever role where she's almost exclusively defined by her relationships into this more like active and like very driven by herself and her own motivations kind of character.
Yeah. And it's cool because like her hair already is striking because it's, just pure white. And she's kind of known as this having like this really long white hair. So you can like having the ability to like do a mohawk, and it's even more striking than just a regular mohawk because it's that white. Yeah. That white hair is just kind of a cool look, and how she still keeps like that black she has her costume is kind of like black and purple at times, but the 80s punk one is just basically like black leather. Which is cool. She's got that choker as well, and she's wearing those like knuckle gloves.
Yep. Which she's hardcore.
Paul Smith is the one who did the makeover for her. It's kind of inspired by Walt Simonson, who worked at Marvel. He had shaved off his beard and everything, and his daughter was upset and ran to her room when he did that. Paul Smith was the one in charge of this redesign, and there's a quote up on Wikipedia explaining in interviews that he did a number of portraits, all quite lovely and feminine. As a joke, I included a shot of her as Mr. T. The kind of shot where they have to go the other way. Louise Simonson response, they're going to hang us whichever way we go. Let's commit the murder. I argue it was a joke and a monstrously bad idea given my departure following 175 was set prior to the beginning of my run. My vote didn't count. So I did what I could do with what I had left, so we went with the mohawk. But once you get into the whole leather and stud thing, it was a bad joke that got out of hand. It's funny because it just seems like Paul Smith didn't like the design at all, and yet it really struck a chord.
Yeah.
With not just like readers in the 80s, but like today, it's still such a cool look that she goes back to it multiple times. A little soon after, Rogue is she's part of the X-Men now. Rogue has joined the X-Men. She's hanging out by the river. She's unaware that she's being targeted by the government because of her criminal history. And at this point, Mystique is kind of working with the government, like, no, we shouldn't do this. And everybody else is like, we're doing it because they have a weapon that will neutralize Rogue's powers. So in Mississippi, Rogue is just hanging out. Storm stops by, and they talk about Rogue's powers and everything. And to show her how to use them, she lets Rogue take her powers for a little bit, and Storm is kind of knocked unconscious. And so Rogue is flying around with Storm's powers, realizing how cool they are. And that's when she's attacked by Henry Gyrich's crew. And now Rogue loses control of Storm's powers.
Mm-hmm.
So Storm wakes up and goes to rescue Rogue, and stop all the weather problems that Rogue is causing, but she's the one who gets shot with the neutralizer weapon. Thus, Storm's powers are gone.
Forever.
She soon meets Forge, the mutant Forge, whose power is that he can invent anything, and the two fall in love.
Yeah.
But guess what, Hilary?
Oh, no.
Forge made the weapon that stole her powers.
What?
He didn't intend for it to be used on Storm. In fact...
Well, he should have thought about the things that might happen.
Right, yeah. That's kind of thing. So, that kind of puts a real rift in their relationship early on. Somewhere in between, she goes to Asgard in one of the X-Men annuals, and Loki gives her a hammer called Stormcaster, and she has her powers for a little bit. Storm wants to make her his consort. They leave. I don't like the X-Men Asgard stuff, but some people like Stormcaster. So that's 3. During a one-on-one duel with a now married to Madeline Pryor Cyclops, she defeats Cyclops and claims leadership of the X-Men.
Because apparently duels are how the X-Men decide that.
Yeah. After she wins, Cyclops goes and to go be a bad husband and father. And Storm's now the official leader of the X-Men. This was written by Claremont as trying to make like a happy ending for Cyclops because they killed Jean and everything. He wanted Cyclops to be able to go off, raise his child, and be with the woman he loves and be happy.
And that's what happens.
Yeah, that's what happens. In the story, it's written that Storm, who doesn't have her powers, beats Cyclops. And Madeline Pryor is like, oh man, I hope he loses so he can be happy with me, but I guess I'll still love him if he stays. But then it's later retconned when Madeline Pryor is turned out to be, the clone of Jean and evil and everything, and she's the Goblin Queen, that she was using her powers at the time to make it so Cyclops lost.
Okay, I hate this twice.
Yeah, I think there are some people...
I hate the initial idea because I don't like... I mean, they've been setting Storm up as sort of like the second in command all along. So I don't like this idea that she has to like force Cyclops. She has to like prove herself to be able to be the leader. It should just be Cyclops is like, I don't want to do this anymore. And he leaves and Storm is the leader. But then like having it be that she wouldn't have won without this interference is just insane.
I think some people are of different minds of this. I think some don't like the retcon that Storm didn't win it officially, and I think some people are upset that Cyclops would lose that fight initially because he's just been doing it longer. And
that's so stupid.
You're talking about like Cyclops should just go off and do like how guilt-ridden Cyclops. No way is he going to leave off unless somebody beats the crap out of him and tells him to do it.
He does earlier in the series.
Yeah, he's such a problem child. Go listen to our Cyclops spotlight to see what a mess Cyclops and his life have been. All right, so she's powerless still. And for a while, there's a pretty classic series called, or storyline called Life Death, where Storm is really coming to terms with the fact that she doesn't have her powers, that she can't fly, that she's not connected to Earth's weathers anymore. It's, being kind of like neutered in all this way. Hilary, I imagine it would be akin to stilling someone in the Wheel of Time series.
Yes. Hey.
So yeah, it really does like force her into a lot of like introspection of herself. She kind of goes off away from the X-Men and has some really like nasty encounters on her travels, and where she meets a character who we later find out is the Adversary, which is kind of this supernatural being that's really out to get Forge. That all leads to Fall of the Mutants. They have to team up with Forge and the Freedom Force, which is Mystique's Brotherhood of Mutants who are now working for the government. They all team up to stop the Adversary. Storm gets her powers back. But in the process of Fall of the Mutants, they all have to kind of give up their life essence to defeat the Adversary and die. And so all the world thinks the X-Men are dead. Nova is the one who brings them back. Wait, it's not Nova. Wait, is it? I said this last time. Which was it, Hilary?
I don't know.
X-Men Nova. No, that's Cassandra Nova. Oh, no. Fall of Mutants Nova? Kitty Pryde, Roma! Oh, yeah, those are so different.
Oh, Roma.
Yeah, Roma. Yeah, Roma, this goddess brings him back to life, and now all the world thinks the X-Men are dead. But Storm has her powers back. They're living in Australia now. This is the Australia times of the X-Men, which we talked about before. And during these Australia times, Storm is seemingly killed fighting Nanny and the Orphan Maker. Oh, was she fighting Nanny or the Orphan Maker? Because I remember they thought Havoc killed Storm by accident or something. Look, the point is, everybody thinks Storm is killed and dead, but it turns out Nanny and the Orphan Maker actually put a fake body down there and kidnapped Storm and turned her into a little kid and gave her amnesia, and she lost her powers kind of, and now she's and then she escapes from them. Nanny is like this egg-shaped robot-looking villain with goggles and arms and legs, and Orphan Maker is this like guy that looks like your standard tech-based superhero, except he talks like a little kid.
Boy, when we do these character histories, they just go... I mean, for someone like Storm that just goes back to like way, way back in X-Men history, it just goes and goes and goes and goes. And then this happened, and then this crazy thing happened, and then this was insane, and now they're in Australia, and now she's a child.
She is now. She's now a child. She has amnesia. I can't remember her having her powers, but maybe every now and then like a power happens. So yeah, the X-Men think she's dead still. She kind of has these little bit of flashbacks and memories, but she's on her own. And she goes back to being Pickpocket, but she's also being chased by the Shadow King at this time. But during this, she is pickpocketing, and she meets the mutant named Gambit. And
this is where I got confused.
This is where you got confused.
Just because I always knew like that was a thing that had happened, but it didn't make sense with her history, and so it was always very weird.
No, she is because she's been reverted to a child. Yeah, I can see why if you didn't realize that.
Yeah, I was like, how was she a child and this happened, but then she was also, it was very confusing.
She meets Gambit, and the two of them kind of just team up, start thieving and pickpocketing and stealing from around town, and are pretty good at it. But then the Shadow King shows up, and they have to get away, and they join up with the X-Men, and this is Gambit's first time joining the X-Men at that time. I don't think he officially joins until later, but yeah, he kind of is like, Storm, we don't have to stay here. We could go off and go do all the thieving that we were doing. And Storm's like, I can't. I'm Storm. During the Extinction Agenda crossover, Storm is restored to her right age, physically and mentally, and she's back. She's got her powers. She's got her memories. She's as old as she's supposed to be. She's in it. She becomes the leader of the Gold Team of the X-Men. Because there's the two books. There's the Jim Lee one, the X-Men Blue Team that Cyclops is leading with like Wolverine, Psylocke, Beast, and Gambit. And then there's the Gold Team, which has Iceman, Colossus, Storm, Jean, and Bishop.
So that's some pretty good splitting of like who's on which team.
Yeah, Jim Lee, I think we've said this before, Jim Lee got to pick which ones he was going to have on his team first, because he was the artist at the time. Also on Storm's team is Archangel as well. I forgot about him. During this time where Storm is leading the Gold Team in the early 90s, now we're in the early 90s of the comics, by the way. This is also where Storm's costume becomes, Jim Lee redesigns it that all-white outfit.
Like in the cartoon.
Like in the cartoon, yeah. Early 90s Storm does look like cartoon Storm. The X-Men are back together, all together after kind of being split up. Forge is now part of the X-Men, though not officially, I don't think. Him and Storm have kind of patched things over. Forge proposes to her, but because she needs a freaking minute to answer, because she's not sure if she wants to marry the guy who created a weapon that stole her powers and really changed her life in dramatic ways, and she needs like a night to think about it. He assumes her answer is no, and so he says he's leaving and he's taking a mentally unstable Mystique with him. So you know what, Forge? You didn't deserve her.
No.
And
that demonstrates that.
Storm, when Forge admits that and leaves, Storm is there, and she's like, I was gonna say yes. She basically had to, like, decide, can she be happy while still being responsible to the X-Men? And
she's
also with all the
she has responsibilities and she has all kinds of baggage and she's gonna need a minute.
Nope.
Forge.
Anyway, so Forge goes off and makes the biggest mistake of his life. Mikhail Rasputin, who is Colossus's brother, Colossus's crazy brother, seemingly kills the remaining Morlocks. And not saying that's anyone's fault. Not saying there was somebody who promised to take care of the Morlocks.
You're not gonna blame that on anyone.
I mean, yes, it's obviously Mikhail Rasputin's fault, sure. But you know that, like, later Storm is like, if only I had been a better leader.
Yeah, well, if only.
So, turns out... Oh, and
it's almost like dueling isn't a super effective way of choosing leadership.
Right. And don't forget, so when I say he kills the remaining Morlocks, that's because in the 80s, the Morlocks in general were wiped out by the Marauders during the Mutant Massacre, the Morlock Massacre. And I'm not saying that is anyone else's fault.
No, we're not going to blame that on...
So, like, this is now the second time the Morlocks have been massacred. So, first was the Marauders under Sinister's command, and now it's just Mikhail Rasputin being a little off the wall. This also means Colossus gets a lot of baggage at this time. But turns out the Morlocks weren't killed. Mikhail had brought them to this weird dimension, and he was making them climb up a hill that was the worst hill to climb up. And if they got to the top,
the worst,
they were proved worthy. And if they were worthy, they would join his terrorist group called Gene Nation. And so Gene Nation, which is including Marrow, come to the real world and are committing all these terrorist acts. Marrow has a bomb attached to her heart, and it is going to blow up. And so Storm and her have a knife fight, and Storm tears out Marrow's heart by her bare hands, stopping the bomb.
That's not easy to do.
It's not. I have tried it, and I have had it done to me. It is not. It's never worked for either one of us.
Yeah.
It just kind of hurts.
Remember that knife fight that we had?
The knife fight we had, yes.
Yeah.
It's why I constantly wake up in the night screaming.
Yeah. Well, I tried to take out your heart.
Yeah.
It didn't work.
I
had to go other routes.
Luckily for Marrow had a second heart. But at the time, Storm didn't know that.
You know what's weird?
What?
The X-Men.
Well, yeah. Marrow's the one whose power is that her bones come out of her body and she can use them like knives.
Mm-hmm.
I like Marrow. Her first design is like off the wall. Marrow will later join the X-Men and then later be very inconsistent in her character portrayals. So then we get this really crappy miniseries written by Warren Ellis in the 90s. I think it's 1996, where she goes to the dimension where Mikhail Rasputin is there, and they have this whole thing. And it's this really dumb series because it's the first Storm miniseries, but it's not really a Storm story outside of her time with the Morlocks. But, like, you don't really learn much about Storm in it, and everybody thinks she's dead. And in that story, Cable is the one who's walking around trying to figure out if she's really dead, even though Cable has, like, no history with her at this point. And
so this is a Storm title?
This is a Storm title, a Storm City miniseries where Cable's like, I'm so sad she's dead, even though I didn't really know her well. And the other X-Men are just fine about it. They're just like, we don't believe it. And if she is, we're okay. It's just so weird and poorly written. It's one of those, it's not good. This is not a series you should give somebody who's like, hey, you got a good Storm story? No, don't give him the Warren Ellis miniseries.
I've got one.
Later, this is where Storm kind of seems... Storm has a character arc under Chris Claremont. Mm-hmm. Joining the X-Men, kind of being that naive way you described at the beginning, and getting a much harder edge, dealing with life and death in big ways, losing her powers and having to really up her game physically, and all this stuff, leading the X-Men. And then in the 90s, she does kind of like run out of an arc to do. She's kind of like now settled into her character. And so there aren't really like a lot of Storm stories in the 90s. When the new millennium comes and the teams are split up again with Grant Morrison writing new X-Men and Chuck Austin and Joe Casey writing the X-Men. Storm is the leader of the Extreme X-Men team, which is Chris Claremont returning to comics. And the Extreme X-Men team, we talked about it with Rogue, is the team that's looking for Destiny's diaries.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, Destiny had written the diaries about, like, the future and everything. I guess in the late 90s, Storm is part of the 12 that Apocalypse is trying to get, but that's not a very good story anyway. And it's more that she's one of 12 in there. So yeah, she's leading the Extreme X-Men team for a while. And during this, an alien named Khan wants her to be his queen. An alien warlord. So
people gotta stop wanting people to be their queen. And
this is like the fourth. Yeah, like you've got Doctor Doom, Loki, Dracula, and then this alien Khan, who are all these villainous characters who are all in love with Storm. There's just something about her that villains love.
Yes.
All right, so soon after all of this Extreme X-Men stuff, now we're into like 2005, 2006. Storm and T'Challa reunite. And this is the retconned history of their relationship becoming into effect. This is when Eric Jerome Dickey wrote that Storm miniseries to explain how they were in love as teenagers, and that leads up to their marriage. And I am of two minds about the retcon specifically, because it kind of made me really start thinking about like continuity and how important it is versus how not important it is. Because if the X-Men had an end point, if they were going to end and characters could have the end attached to their own stories, then continuity is something that I would want to protect because it would all lead to something.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you create this retcon, the problem continuity-wise isn't so much that, like, oh, you're saying these two characters had a relationship. It's you're saying these two characters had a relationship, but then all the time in between was supposed to then go back and read all the stories from the 70s, 80s, and 90s with that in our mind, even though it's never there. And so that becomes like a weird reread issue.
Yeah.
But then I don't think the story or the marriage is being written for the people who are going to go back and reread all the X-Men comics from the 60s and 70s on. I think it's being written to attract new readers. You know, it's an event. It's being written to, you know, make headlines and bring in new readers. And if you don't have an end point in your continuity, then you run out of stories to tell with the characters, and they just start spinning their wheels. So you have to start retconning stuff and come up with new things.
Yeah, so maybe you just have to look at the whole thing as more fluid than we like to.
So it's one of those things where, like, I am somebody who rereads the comics, so, like, reading the Eric Jerome Dickey story, it's weird for me. But for other people, it wouldn't be an issue. The actual miniseries isn't bad, though I'm not a fan of now T'Challa being the one who rescues Storm versus the other way around. And
why would you do something like that?
I don't really
That's such a boneheaded thing.
I don't really like... Storm is just she's so strange in that. She's so... I don't know. She's questioning about, like, what would make her... There's a thing that, like, makes boys into men. So what makes girls into women? And... You know
what I can't get enough of is men writing profound female character development. Love it. They always nail it.
I don't love the story, but it's not necessarily, like, poorly written. And if somebody was interested in, after the movie, if they were interested in Black Panther and they were like, oh, I heard him and Storm are together, I would feel like you could give them that story. And I think it would be, the one to give them, and it would be good and satisfy them. And then if in the new MCU, Storm shows up and her and Black Panther have a relationship, then that story is even more important. It made me kind of really think about the weirdness of continuity that has been going for...
You had like an existential comic
60
crisis.
years. Yeah. This is where, like, Storm disappears for me. when I'm reading the X-Men comics, because I'm reading like specifically the X-Men comics at this time. I'm reading all the X-Men series at this time. So Storm's like, so when Storm and him get married, they go off and lead the Fantastic Four post Civil War. I'm like, well, I'm not reading Fantastic Four. And I remember being kind of bitter about it, because to me, Storm is 100% an X-Men character. And it seemed like another book and another franchise was stealing her away.
Yeah, I could see that.
Professor Xavier was like, now that you're becoming the Queen of Wakanda. You're one of the most important mutants in the world now, and you can make real change. And I think the problem for me is that no one ever really did anything with that. Like, they never really balanced. If Storm's now this queen, it seemed like she could have done more for mutants at the time than she ever did in this marriage and queendom, which I thought was I don't know, just seemed kind of like lazy. Like, they wanted the marriage, but they didn't want all the baggage that Storm comes with. Mm-hmm. Being part of the X-Men, being, a leader of the X-Men and everything.
That sucks.
How do you feel about these the two characters getting married?
I don't love it. I mean, I haven't read it, so like maybe it makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. Although hearing you talk about it, it seems like maybe not.
I don't know.
But I don't love it just from the two prominent Black characters in the universe that are just like, they should get married. I don't know.
So now
it just seems very cutesy and like a little tokeny.
And you have to now retcon both their history to show why that's happening, because they've never really interacted, and so it's kind of a case.
Because the only thing that matters is that one is Black and the other is Black, and now they're getting married.
And I think at the time that was the big complaint, but I also kind of I feel like that complaint that was there kind of cooled as the stories went on, and it became the status quo, and Storm was there, and people were like, all right, well, now they're a couple. It was weird, and I know some people raised that concern. I think as it went on, people were less like, this was a stupid marketing ploy, and just being like, all right, well, comics do this stuff all the time anyway.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that it's annoying in itself, and it's also annoying in its like demonstration of this thing that comics do and are still doing, where they're like, see, look at these strong characters who aren't white, and like, see how we're very diverse and all this stuff, not using them in the fluid development of their characters. They're just like chopping them up into black character, and just like dumping them together. And so it's irritating by itself, and it's also irritating because it's just something that the comic industry keeps doing. Like, I keep seeing these things online where they present all of the sub characters that like are people of color and all of this stuff, and saying, so look at this, see, we're so great and diverse, but like none of those characters have had, sustained solo comics, and like they're all just like these characters that are supporting characters for other characters. And it's this fake diversity that they're putting forward. And I don't like it.
Yeah. With all of that, I think that's a relationship that can be smoothed over in future versions of X-Men and Black Panther and histories and everything. Like, the MCU could smooth over that by having them.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean,
a new animated series could, like, with the retrospect, you can make that a thing from the beginning. But yeah, in 2006, we're like, oh, these two characters talked once in 4 pages of Marvel Team Up 100. Yeah.
They're in love.
But yes, they do. They get married. It's a big event. They lead the Fantastic Four for a bit. She goes back to the X-Men to help them out during the Messiah Complex. She battles the Shadow King again, this time with the help of the Panther God Bast. She seems to be balancing her Wakanda queenhood and X-Men time. At this point, she joined the Astonishing X-Men series after Joss Whedon and Warren Ellis left. Or maybe it was Warren Ellis, because that's where Forge also went bananas again and tried to destroy the universe. And Storm was like, oh, you poor man. But this is the part of these Marvel events and the moments where Marvel's like, look, we have a Black Captain America now. And you're like, cool. And then they're like, well, now look, Steve Rogers is Captain America again. It's like, oh, okay, so nothing you do that ever seems of meaning is permanent.
Right.
Because during the Avengers versus X-Men story, Cyclops' team are powered by the Phoenix Force. They're the Phoenix Five. And
Oh boy, I remember this.
Namor is one of them. And he attacks Wakanda and destroys Wakanda with a huge tidal wave and everything. Storm, who is siding with the X-Men at this time, shows up and she's like, I would have come and fought with you if you told me. And T'Challa's like, you can't be here anymore. You're banished from Wakanda, and the priest has annulled our marriage. And she's like, wait, you're the priest. He's like, I know.
Huh.
And so they are now divorced. And
so why? What happened?
Just that
Why
Storm...
did he banish her?
Because Storm was siding with the X-Men during the Avengers vs. X-Men story. Oh. And it was the mutants who destroyed Wakanda. Well, it was Namor, but he's part of the X-Men at this time. So he's like, sorry, you're banished. We're not married anymore. And, okay, that would be like, ugh, that's dumb enough. But there's a mini-series that's going on at this time called AVX. And it's just these, like, very short vignettes of, like, a certain Avenger and a certain X-Men fighting. And it's not really story-based. It's just an action thing, so you can see, like, Captain America fight Cyclops. And you can see Wolverine, Gambit fight Hawkeye, and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But they pit Storm and Black Panther against each other and their story. And so now you have a couple who's, like, T'Challa's like, we're divorced. And so they just start fist fighting and punching each other in the face. And when you think about that in comics, like, sure, everybody's punching everybody. But when you think about it, these two, like, this is basically a domestic dispute being solved by punching and kicking each other in the face and giving each other bloody noses. And Storm saying stuff like, I never realized how cold you were. And Black Panther being like, I knew you could never love me the way I needed you to. And it's just like, to make this stupid one-shot fight, they have to, like, damage both these characters. You do a comic book staple that's really gross when you think that these two people are married and divorced within, like, the 5-minute span of this fight. It's crazy. I hate it.
Yeah, that sucks.
I hate it. Anyway, Storm, after that, Storm goes to join Wolverine's new school, the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning, that Wolverine is leading now that the X-Men have split up. And actually, the two start a romantic relationship.
Yeah.
Storm and
which
Wolverine.
I actually kind of buy.
Yeah, I didn't like when it first happened, I'm like, oh, I don't know. And then as it went on, I'm like, you know what? This weirdly works.
Yeah.
Because she's somebody that will not put up with his crap. Mm-hmm. And I think that's... a lot of people are like, Wolverine, you're so mysterious, and you're so strong, and you're so... You have such a dark life. And Wolverine's like, I know, why is it like this? But, like, Storm is just like, yeah, all right, deal with it. Now, shut up and go get dinner. You know?
Yeah.
She's very, like... She puts him in his place, and, like, during their relationship, this is as he's like, his healing power isn't working, and she's just like, you're being an idiot. Stop doing things that you can't do without your healing power now. And he's like, I don't know. He's like, shut up and stop it. I think it's the difference between that Black Panther relationship that had to be retconned to be a history versus like a real history that these characters have.
Yeah.
And like,
it develops into this.
You never... It's never, like, too flirty or everything, but the two characters are, like, really close at times in the comics anyway. And so, yeah, it just, like, when that relationship was going on, I liked it. And I also liked, it was a Wolverine comic where he was out with Storm and they were out on a date and everything. And he's saying, like, I'm sorry I was just stupid and hung up on Jean for so long that I didn't realize this relationship that was right in front of me and everything. And I'm like, thank you for saying I'm sorry for being hung up on Jean for so long. But of course, as soon as Jean comes back, Wolverine is just like, Jean!
Of course.
That's the other problem with comics never ending. We're just right back to the Wolverine's in love with Jean thing, and I could care less about that. Anyway, like you, I kind of get behind the Storm Wolverine relationship.
Yeah.
He dies.
Wah, wah.
Yeah, the Axis storyline happens and Storm is kind of inverted to being evil. That's all solved. The Secret Wars happen. She becomes the leader of the X-Men again. She moves their mansion to Limbo, which is the version of hell that Ileana Rasputin became magic and lived a lot of her childhood in. She is the leader of the X-Men during the war with the Inhumans, but that is a very stupid thing, and I hate the Inhumans these days, so whatever. This is during the time where Marvel's like, Inhumans, huh? They're as cool, if not cooler, than the X-Men, huh?
Aren't they cool?
She decides, because of the war with the Inhumans, that she's not doing a great job leading the X-Men, so she gives leadership to Kitty Pryde, and she's part of that group for a while. Then she's part of the group that's transported to Nate Gray's Age of X-Men reality, is in that situation that whole time. I didn't really like that storyline. Anyway, she returns with the rest of the lost, trapped X-Men to save the X-Men that were left behind, and now we're at House of X, Powers of X.
There we are.
Brought
it all up.
I didn't say, because you like this as well, it was 2015, so that's after the Secret Wars happened. Storm gets her, or maybe it's right before. Gosh, I can't remember when Secret Wars happened. After she joins Wolverine's school, the higher learning school, and starts a relationship with Wolverine, she gets her own series. She also reverts back to the Mohawk look. She goes back to the Mohawk, though I don't think the punk look. She's just the Mohawk hairstyle.
Yeah, well, she's older, so yeah. I don't know if she'd pull off the leather studs.
But she also gets her own ongoing series that lasts for 11 issues and is written by Greg Pak during this time. That series is very standalone, where like every issue kind of deals with a certain aspect of like Storm's history. Mm-hmm. One issue deals with her and Callisto. One issue deals with her and Forge, and her early days as being worshipped as a goddess. So it's like all these different stories, a couple of like long like 3-parters, but it's just Storm doing her own series, and you really like that series.
I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought it was, I mean, it does have that like sort of choppy thing with all the different aspects of her past, but it works really, really well as a cohesive character piece.
Yeah, it was like the first of the Storm like miniseries that I read. I was like, this is what I would give someone if they're like, hey, I've liked the movies or the cartoons or whatever, I like Storm, do you have a Storm comic I can read?
Yeah,
that seems,
it's just such a great like she's a fully developed, self-possessed woman, and you just get to see her like come to this final realization about who she is and what the things of her past mean to her and how she's going to move forward. And it gives her such a strong and like meaningful moment in her, like as if she's a real person and coming to, I don't know, like almost coming out of a midlife crisis kind of situation where she's like, who am I? But she just like gets there, and she's just her now.
Yeah. I found Greg Pak's like writing of her to be a little off, but you know, to somebody who has never read the comics or something, that won't matter. And to even people who've read the comics, that probably wasn't a big deal. There was just, at one point she said, what the hell? And I was like, has Storm ever said the phrase, what the hell?
Well, I think that's part of why I liked it so much.
Yeah, sure.
I've always sort of written off Storm as like,
she can be written very regal.
If you want someone to be a favorite character, Storm is never going to be my favorite character until I read this Greg Pak thing, because it really taps into all of the things that show up earlier in her character, but never really feel like the thing that people push with Storm. Because yeah, like you said, she's seems most commonly presented as this regal kind of like studious, like, oh no kind of a character. And like periodically you see this element in her that wants to like really figure herself out, and like maybe she needs to go and like do something apart from the X-Men to really find out who she is. And like with the whole Carol Danvers at the mansion thing, she threatens to leave, and like you get these little moments of her having a real strong sense of self and sort of a wanderlust element to her, that those things that I feel like get very buried for most of her character development are these little tiny things that make me think I could really dig this character. And that's where it goes very heavy into that kind of thing in that run. Yeah,
it was cool. It ended with Secret Wars. It's funny, like Storm's one of those characters, a lot of the X-Men are like this, where I think she has things about her aspect, but like in terms of like holding her own long-running series, like Nightcrawler or Colossus, like these are characters that were made specifically to be in the X-Men first, and then became like individual characters later. I find them harder. I imagine they're harder to write solo series for a long period of time for. And I don't think Greg Pak really had like an overarching long-running storyline planned, which I think is too bad, but maybe that's why it only lasted for 11 issues.
Well, yeah, it doesn't at all feel like something that would have gone
50
longer.
issues,
It feels like it's a nice wrapped up storyline.
Yeah. All right, Storm in cartoons, Hilary. 90s anime. Well, actually, she was in the Pride of the X-Men, and I remember laughing because Xavier had that one line about her who said, "Whose control and mastery over the elements is not completely understood."
Oh yeah, I remember
which I thought was fun because everybody's all like, "He can turn to metal. She can control light. We don't know how storm power works."
I mean, it's not hard to say. Yeah. She controls the weather.
Yep.
The end.
She's in every animated series there is. So she's in the 90s animated series, which we're rewatching right now. And she's there right out of the gate. And you wanted to talk about animated Storm?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the first one that I ever saw in the 90s cartoon. And so that really colors my conception of Storm as a character. And so that's kind of like the root of like why I don't like Storm particularly. And then when we see, her development in the comics, how she gets much more interesting to me personally.
I like Storm in the cartoon, but it's her power, the use of her power is always having to be like summoned like a genie.
Yeah.
It's that always kind of strikes me as a bit campy. But I mean, that's just what comic book dialogue sounds like when you yell it into a microphone, I guess.
True.
But yeah, I mean, she's pretty important in it. She has a few episodes, but it's not like the same way that Wolverine or even like Rogue gets these spotlights.
Yeah, she feels more like a tentpole character. Like she's there and she's important and like she kind of encapsulates.
I see her in that show as her being the heart of that team. Like she's the one who will talk reason, and she's kind of like the moral compass of that group, more so than anybody else, more so than like Jean or Beast or And this is a version of Storm too that also will tell Wolverine to shut up.
Yeah,
and I like her and Gambit's relationship in that series. It plays that they kind of have that history, even though we never see like the whole Storm and Gambit stealing and robbing together. But I like the two of them together in that. She was in X-Men Evolution. She was one of the few who wasn't a teenager. It was really just
she's like a teacher.
Yeah, it's Wolverine, Storm, and Beast who are the adults.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Storm and she's made the aunt of Evan Daniels, aka Spike, and that. Yeah, I don't remember her getting too much focus in that either. But again,
they don't do a lot of focusing on the adults in that show.
Yeah, just Wolverine. Beast gets an episode, but it's really Wolverine. Yeah, she is in Wolverine the X-Men, but I don't remember her having much to do in that either.
I don't remember. I hardly remember that show.
I remember her having like some cool power moments in X-Men Evolution, coming off the movie, and I remember liking her costume in X-Men Evolution. It is cool. It kind of had a more modern take.
Yeah, it's a lot more drapey and sort of svelte.
Whereas in the Wolverine the X-Men costume is kind of going for that like black spandexy look that she had when she first appeared. Only it's like full body. Yeah, it's weird that I watched all of Wolverine and the X-Men, and yet it's the one that I have the hardest time remembering.
I know. We talk about this all the time.
It's crazy when we rewatch it. And be like, whoa! This show has Wolverine? She was in the Marvel anime, the X-Men Marvel anime, which is what, like 9 episodes, 11 episodes, 13 episodes. Short. Stop me when it's a short thing, right?
Yeah, it's short.
But that team is kind of based off of the Joss Whedon Astonishing X-Men, except it also includes Storm, which I think shows you how dang important Storm is, that they kind of base it off of a completely different team, and they're like, oh, right, and we also need Storm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I appreciate. So those are the cartoons. She's been in a lot of the movies. Halle Berry, obviously, played Storm in 4 of the films. Just the 4? Yeah, 4 of the films. Alexandra Shipp plays her in the prequel films Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix. There was also a cut scene in Wolverine Origins where we would have saw her as a little girl.
Oh yeah, did we see that? Was it like, did they film it and we got to see it?
I think they filmed it and we saw, like in the movie, when Wolverine leaves Team X and he's like, I'm done with this. There's lightning and thunder going on, and I think that's supposed to be Storm.
Okay.
It's included on the, you can watch in the bonus features. And we've talked a little bit about Halle Berry as Storm. My favorite version of Storm in those movies, in those original Halle Berry ones, are her in X-Men 2.
Yeah.
I think X-Men 3 is strange because she takes that leadership role, but then they also forget she has any interesting uses with her powers.
Oh, yes.
So, I actually don't really hate her in X-Men 3. I actually kind of like she really does become like the leader in that movie because, Cyclops is gone, Jean is mute during that entire film, Xavier is gone. She really is kind of like the number 2 to Hugh Jackman's Wolverine in that film.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. She's very quiet in the first X-Men movie. She doesn't have too many lines at all.
Yeah, it's Halle Berry in that role is always so interesting to me because I really feel like she could do a good Storm and they just never give it to her.
Yeah. Yeah, it is weird thinking that like maybe the more accurate version of Storm is the Brett Ratner X-Men. Halle Berry, it was always, in the reports and everything that she was arguing and fighting for more lines for Storm and more of a role. And it's also funny, as a character who's kind of famous for having such long hair, that the hair keeps getting shorter and shorter with each appearance.
Well, I wonder if she was trying, I wonder if Halle Berry was trying to get them to do something closer to the mohawk. It seems like the shorter her hair gets, the more agency she has.
Yeah. Alexander Shipp, when we first meet her, has the mohawk in X-Men Apocalypse because that's where she is she's a thief in Cairo.
She's pretty cool in that. I like her.
She also has barely any lines in either of those movies.
Yeah.
She's also basically mute when she's Apocalypse is like Horseman of the Apocalypse in that, and then like she switches sides. We'll talk about it because we're talking Apocalypse very soon, but like she switches sides from the Horsemen to the X-Men all without really like any moment, just kind of seeing like, oh, Apocalypse is bad, now I'll switch. I don't know, but
the acting in that is pretty good because you really see her.
Yeah, I'm sure she could have
figured that out.
Done better. It's just, it seems like the people in charge just don't, of those movies, never really know what to do with Storm.
Yeah.
Storm does have a ride, at least at this moment, right? She has a ride in Universal Studios.
Oh, yeah.
The Islands of Adventure. And I met a Storm at Universal Studios. I got a picture with Storm and Rogue, which was cool.
I did too. I got a picture with Storm and Rogue.
She's been in so many of the video games. She was a playable character in the fighting game Marvel vs. Capcom 2. It's weird. They get the voice actors back for a lot of the cartoons, and yet Catherine Disher is the one who voices Storm in these things. And she's the voice of Jean Grey.
Weird.
So she's voicing Storm in Children of the Atom, which is a fighting game, and X-Men vs. Street Fighter, and Marvel vs. Capcom 2. What's weird about that is that the original actress for Storm was a white actress, and they instantly recasted it as soon as they realized what had happened. And yet these Capcom games are like, no, get the other white actress then from the X-Men animated series to voice her.
Yeah, that's
so
pretty
weird.
Dumb.
They got Allison Seeley-Smith back to voice Storm in X-Men Mutant Academy. She was in X-Men Next Dimension, which is another fighting game, and I remember her moves being pretty powerful, but also a little complicated in that one. You played the X-Men Legend games. She's in both of those.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I probably played her at some point. She wasn't one of my preferred characters.
Oh, yeah. You can bet I played Storm a bunch in X-Men Legends, especially because you, like we said before, you always got that announcer saying what kind of team you made. So I would go for the I'd go for the Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Storm, Colossus team up a bunch. I loved it. And I would give her the Mohawk look for sure. And she's also a playable character. She's one of the few X-Men in Marvel vs. Capcom 3. But yeah, if there's been an X-Men game, Storm's been in it. We never talk about the ultimate versions of these characters anymore. She was fine in those. I like her. But they don't really do anything new with her so much. Oh, you know what, though? In Ultimate X-Men, they pair her and Beast up.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah, like very early on. That in Mark Millar's like early issues of Ultimate X-Men. Storm and and Beast, prior to Beast being blue, kind of flirt and hit it off, and are kind of an item. And then when Beast gets blue, he starts like pushing everybody away.
I'm just so blue.
Yeah. So, and I remember kind of liking that too. That combination.
Well, there are just certain characters that just feel like the adults.
Yeah.
And so you
sure.
can kind of put any of those together. You know what I mean? Like you've got the Storm, you got Beast, you got Wolverine, you got Gambit. Like all of those just feel like the grown-ups.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just sort of intermix them.
I remember in Ultimate X-Men, her origin is that she's stealing a car when Xavier and Cyclops find her. So she still has that thief background.
Yeah.
Here's some comments. We tend to ask people what they think of the characters before we do the spotlights. Man with Info on Twitter says she's one of the most powerful of the X-Men, which is true. I mean, right when people talk about how like the female members of the X-Men are the most powerful ones, it's like you always point to Storm.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, she just feels kind of next level as far as powers go.
She's labeled these days as an Omega mutant. I don't know if that was always true, because again, she was part of the 12 and everything, and Omega is being like the pinnacle, the next stage.
I think she's just grown throughout her entire existence as a character. You know, she's developed her power in that way.
He Got Died says, she is my second favorite X-Men behind only Wolverine. I think in many ways she exemplifies the ideal X-Man, more so even than Cyclops. She is intelligent, confident, and earns the respect of everyone around her. No one ever questions her leadership ability, nor should they. Avinus says she's the soul of the X-Men. In my mind, their best frontline battle leader, with an inner nobility that put her on even footing with the big hitters like Doctor Doom and Magneto. Excellent character, one of the best written. By Claremont, anyways. I haven't liked most of her other renditions. Shadewing says, amazing character, but sadly only Claremont seemed to know what to do with her. Her gradual arc from aloof weather goddess to hard-edged, ruthless survivor was brilliantly done. Life Death is easily my favorite Aurora story of all time, and powerlessness only made her stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of agree with that, in that post Claremont, that's what I meant when I said she kind of had a story arc, and then it kind of ended.
Yeah.
When Claremont
kind of stagnates.
She when she's the leader of the Gold Team, it's still kind of there for a little bit, but yeah, they just kind of seem to run out of stories with her, which I mean is too bad. But then there's always more stories to be done, and like I said, it depends on how you view continuity. You can if you start getting more loose with it, you realize you have plenty of stories you can tell.
Yeah,
so,
true.
Yeah, I like her vampire history too. So I don't know. Hilary, how do you feel about Storm in general then?
Well, I mean, I guess it's just what I've said before, that it's sort of come to me very recently.
Right.
That there are parts of her character and ways that her character is portrayed sometimes, that I really, really like a lot. And that sort of have this kind of power and grace to her. But it's just more fleshed out. Like she feels like a real person. But if you're just looking at like standard Storm, whatever, then I don't care much for her.
I remember you kind of teased me when we were like first becoming friends and everything, because we'd get along about the X-Men, but I'd be like, yeah, Storm's one of my favorite, and you'd be like, you like Storm? And because like my first interactions with her are the Len Wein Storm and then the Chris Claremont Storm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, for a long time, like before I really read a lot of Rogue comics, Storm was like up there with my favorite X-Men characters. And I feel like any X-Men team that wants to be legitimate has Storm on it.
She's definitely crucial.
She's crucial. I mean, yeah, I've always loved Storm. I've always thought she's cool. She was one of my first early favorites with the X-Men. Loved playing her in those X-Men Legend games. Yeah, I have like nothing but good things to say about Storm. I tend to enjoy an X-Men team being field-led by Storm over Cyclops.
Well, she has a more kind of casual control over the team. Like she just by existing, she has that control.
There was this moment I remember. I can't remember if it was Days of Future Past or not. I think it was, where Storm gives Wolverine an order, and Wolverine, this is very early on in Storm leading, and Wolverine's like, I wouldn't take that from Cyclops, and or I wouldn't take that order from Cyclops, and Storm's like, well, you'll take that order from me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of like they're at the beginning, like Storm is just like, I don't care. Cyclops who?
Right.
Cyclops who? Wolverine.
Yeah, Cyclops always, I mean, like, he's the original leader, but there's always this element of him, like, having to prove himself and, like, just being a little more, like, no, I'm in charge.
Yeah, well, it's the difference, too, of, like, so you think about how, like, the first X-Men are made. You know, Jean is made to be the girl, and she's made so that her and Cyclops can be in love. And that's versus having two characters who are their own people first, and then they have chemistry, so you pair them together. And it's the same thing with, like, Cyclops is made to be the leader, and Storm is not. But then you just start realizing, as you write Storm, like, oh, she's the leader.
Yeah, she just grows into it.
My longtime favorites of the X-Men, right up there with my top favorites. So I have a Storm shirt. It's really cool. It's this like 80s style shirt that has Storm as drawn by Chris Michello. It says 1975 on it for when she first appeared. I love it.
Nice.
No shirt, no X-Men shirt's legitimate without Storm. And Hilary, look at this. We did a whole character spotlight. Storm has like no interactions with Mr. Sinister.
Hey!
You don't have to deal with that. How about that?
That's another thing I like about Storm. I'll make a list.
All right. Well, that's our character spotlight of Storm. Let's see. I'm Dust vs. Tweak everywhere online. Apart from other shows on Radio Meanwhile Network, I'm the co-host of the podcast The All the Book Show. Thank you to Prophetic Music for our theme song. You can join us on our next episode as we watch and discuss X-Men Apocalypse.
Yay!
Which, at the time of recording, is on Disney+. If you need to stream it, I guess you can rent it other places as well. They've really started adding stuff. Days of Future Past is there. So's the first X-Men movie, and I think The Wolverine is on its way. It's just so weird seeing these X-Men movies on the Disney Plus channel.
Yeah, it's causing problems for you.
Yeah, I don't know. Just gotta accept life is weird. I've got it on Blu-ray, so I'll just watch it there so I don't have to watch it.
Yep.
But yeah, if you're wondering, I mean, apparently Disney Plus has 60 million subscribers, so I'm sure if you're listening to this, you probably have access to Disney Plus. So yeah, X-Men Apocalypse is next, and then we're continuing on season 2 of the X-Men animated series, which actually will involve a Storm-focused episode. Whatever it takes.
Yeah.
Again, you can find more about the show and others like it at our network's website, radiomeanwhile.com. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, previously on X. Please rate, subscribe, and share the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Snow!